Hi, welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick, and co-host is Chris Lucian. And we're very excited to have Ben Kovitz back on the show. He joined us earlier, this year to share about how he's done mobbing in his college classroom. And today we're on because we want to walk through. Ben has some questions about dealing with difficulties with mob programming. And so we thought we'd record it for the fun of it and publish it. I guess before we jump to the questions, for those who haven't seen the previous episode with Ben, we'll link it in the show notes. But Ben, can you give a quick intro to yourself and then maybe hit us with the first question?
Oh, I was a software developer for a long time. Then now I'm currently teaching uh, software design at Cal Poly Humboldt up in Arcata, California. And I tried an experimental approach, or I am trying an experimental approach to teaching the class this semester, which is mob programming. We're doing all of the programming in class is done collaboratively and during class, we don't. Sometimes we send out assignments to say, here, see if you can come up with a design, but then we mob it together. We're making a diagram editor to make graphs as our um, collective project, and we're combining that with readings about software design. But it's mostly an action-oriented class.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, shoot, what's your first question?
Okay, so um, sometimes when programming, when working on code, I need to go off by myself and think something through, maybe for hours, maybe overnight. And also, when I, emerge with some, the ideas fleshed out enough that I can talk about it, explaining it might take more than 3 minutes or 7 minutes, whatever our rotation time is. And also getting agreement on it might take longer. There may be discussion, there may be, alternatives. So what I'm wondering is how do you incorporate that kind of exploration and discussion into a mobbing session?
Fantastic.
Yeah, well, so I maybe I can kind of talk first to my experience. I think that, there is a piece of uh either discovery and or driving things forward. Sometimes a mob can best spend its time by doing independent veins of research and then coming back together to move things forward. But also I think that I think if there's like strong disagreement between paths or something along those lines. Sometimes we just try both because people learn a lot from that. And maybe in doing one, the other person's convinced, or maybe they'll say, "Oh, my idea is still better." And so actually trying both is not a bad thing. It might feel at the time like it's a waste because you have a working solution in one area but not in the other. But but honestly, when you come out of that do both scenario, the team has a lot of learning as well as a more objective analysis of what solution is going to be picked. And so generally, for getting past the hurdle of decision making, sometimes it's just we've had a multiple variety of rules. One of them being, go with the most junior voice if you can't agree. So if the most senior person can't explain why something should be done a certain way, then don't take their solution, right? Instead, take the most junior person's. Or if you don't want to analyze it, or if everybody's relatively equal, then you could flip a coin, or you can, like I said, the do both scenario. And so all three of those have worked. But we typically find that discussing it too long is actually worse than just opening it up and trying it. And I've seen engineers in the past argue for possibly days what would take a few hours to implement on. And so you could have gotten past or circumvented that discussion and saved a lot of time and moved things forward. Um, sometimes, yeah, the perfect is the enemy of good, that sort of thing. So, Austin, I don't know if you have any other comments.
No, no, yes, and to all that you said. And I think um, I was reading a book, Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0, and he was saying that really successful companies are highly collaborative, but also strongly protect the time for people to go off and do things on their own and then bring that back to the group. And so I think the most difficult thing is that cultures I've seen, whether it's academic or corporate, or just organizations in general, is they lean heavy towards one or the other, and they're not uh, tolerant of the other. So it's like we're a
Oh,
mob, we're always together. How could you possibly want to go off on your own? Like you're breaking the mobbing pact, we're a group, or I do everything alone. There's no way I'm going to pair a mob, right? And so I think you just have to really be working on that culture and environment and kind of like in the no rules rules book. I'm maybe botching the name of it, but it's like you have to keep telling the narrative of your culture you want and telling stories about it. And so so I love to heavily protect people who like, hey, I need to go think about this, for a while. Like great, go do it. Like we all need that time sometimes. And so that can be built in, if you're in a corporate or organization environment with dedicated learning time, that is, tends to be default by solo, but it can be default by group too. Or there's been some people I worked with who are just like, I really need to go figure this out and I'll be back. And then they're kind of working to the side of the mob for days, weeks, months sometimes. And I think it only can become an anti-pattern if they're building up a large batch of things that needs to be, reviewed or something like that. But often they're doing kind of R&D and discovering. And once they have a discovery, it can be like they join the mob and then bring the idea in and then it gets put into production pretty quickly. Uh, and so I think from what I've heard out there in the wild is that mobs sometimes think that someone's like sinning or doing something wrong when they go do that. And then the other thing too is you were talking about the timer. Break the timer when it doesn't make sense. So the timer is a tool, not a rule.
ah,
And so if it's like, oh, so and so has joined the mob and they're going to explain the architecture for us because we haven't worked this part of the code yet, then we're like, if the timer's there, we either click through it or we just turn it off. And then they're explaining, drawing, or walking through the code, or whatever it is. They just keep navigating, or keep driving, or keep drawing the whole time until we get to the end of the conversation, or whatever. And then we can go back to the timer once we're kind of back into like do it mode. And so th those are the thoughts that come to mind. What are your thoughts on our answer there, I guess?
oh, this is very interesting. Well, first of all, speaking of yes and, we had a similar thing in my improv group many years ago in San Diego,
Right.
where and we had this rule: if two people want to have two different ideas, we try them both.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And we said if we have so many ideas, we have a backlog, then we'll have to decide what to put off till our next time we get together. But I think that happened once in like 2 years. So in other words, it was always quicker to try an idea. So I think we even had a rule, no arguing.
Right. Yeah. So yes and improv is kind of the basis for the yes and when we're doing this. And so for those that are experienced with improv comedy or just improv in general, a lot of the same rules to improv apply to mobbing. And so I think that a big piece of it is, uh, just understanding that you're building off of each other to move everything forward. Um, and so there's a lot of benefit to kind of keeping that flow going, flow and yes and other things like that.
Oh yeah, keeping the flow going. You said something a second ago. Oh yeah, it reminds me of another improv principle. The scene is smarter than you are, right? You may have your ideas about where you want it to go, but be ready to give those up, instantly. Because usually it's just, if you just let it go, it kind of knows where to go.
Mhm.
Um,
And
and,
then
oh,
I find myself in a mobbing scenario. I'll have an idea of where I want to go, but I'm not the one actively navigating. And I'm surprised with where we end up, but it's not like it's worse or something when you get there. Like, often even if the solution is not better than the other solution that you were thinking of, maybe it's more of a natural way, rather than your own preferences, something that is more formed by the group and therefore easier to understand for people coming in. So there are a lot of benefits to that.
Oh yeah, and my experience so far, yes, my entire mobbing experience is in this class, not in a production setting. But so far, what I have seen is the group mind of the students plus me is much smarter than me. You know,
I like it.
there, I'm like I was telling them, like if you only, we would go through, we're covering, design patterns in the readings and all those kinds of things. And I say, but if you only remember one design principle from this course, I hope it's this. It's what is the simplest thing that could possibly work? And these students are so good at pushing back against any unnecessary complexity. We just have this code is so simple. I think the students are thinking like, did we learn how to design anything? It's like, well, you kept the code simple.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
Nice. Yeah, what's your next question if you're ready for the next one?
Oh, well, actually, I've still got a comment on that one. So
Yeah,
we
go for
Please.
might
it.
not get through all my questions. But I want to say about the timer is a tool, not a rule. So, since we don't know what we're doing with mobbing, but we're, learning as we go, we tried it a couple of ways. Um, so we have sometimes said, during the design part where we're just talking something out. This is not the type where someone has kind of come up with it on their own and come back. But when we're just kind of talking things out, like putting up, working out some kind of plan on the board of what we're going to do, we have kept up with the driver rotation where the driver is at the whiteboard. And
Mm,
it's sort of a scribe for all the ideas that are coming out. It's kind of sorting them out and putting them up on the whiteboard. And
nice.
actually, that's worked pretty well. Um,
Nice.
we've also thrown out the timer, particularly when one person has, say, overnight come up with some kind of a solution to a problem, and it takes 10 minutes or so to explain it. Both have been
Nice.
successful.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've seen that go well as well, where if someone's like explaining the architecture, the driver rotation will keep happening, but that person just keeps navigating and then those people keep drawing it or whatever, right? On the virtual whiteboard. But it sounds like you have a physical whiteboard there, but same idea for sure.
Oh, so okay, this is one we haven't tried. Hold the navigator, but ro keep rotating the driver.
Right. Yeah, that is something you can do as well. And it's kind of hard because it sounds like we're saying contradictory things all the time, but it's kind of like you feel it, like Chris was saying, whatever has the flow, right? If it's like clearly one person isn't explaining stuff to us, then we just keep them as navigator. If it's kind of like we're all trying to figure it out, we all got half of the ideas, then maybe rotating the navigator is good and you let it keep happening, and so
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I'll add to that. The often when I go into mobs and the discussion of like how much a single person is navigating comes up, I think it fluctuates, but and I don't know the exact time period, but my mind is kind of set on 3 months. It's like over a 3 month period, um, is everybody speaking a roughly equal amount? So it's not like everybody has to be equal all the time, but if you had a period of time where the most senior person was navigating a lot, then you kind of should have that replicate itself across the other team members to the point where um, if a pattern was established by somebody very senior, then the other mobbers should get a chance to navigate the same thing if the pattern is repeated somewhere else, or if there's something else that takes a lot less thought to implement, or something more at their skill level. And I think for the more senior level people in the group, they should be kind of constantly thinking of this idea of keeping everybody on the fluent edge, right? Making sure that the concepts that are going into the code um, are are kind of just above the skill level of like the most junior level person, because then what you'll see is that that person will start reaching a lot more and their skills will improve tremendously. Where if you're way out of their depth and you're like doing things that are extremely complicated and they don't understand at all, then they're no longer in the fluent edge, and they would most likely be experiencing frustration. So I think with those two things in mind, it keeping the flow is a lot easier. And and it begins to feel weird after a longer period of time if somebody has been speaking most of that time. And so I think, if you look over the course of 3 months, just on average, what's your gut feeling of how often individuals have been talking, and trying to make sure that that's roughly equal across the whole system?
Okay. Oh, makes a lot of sense. And okay. And yeah, this is the hold the navigator, rotate the driver. I haven't tried this yet.
Mhm.
Let's see. On to another question.
Nice.
So, a fundamental principle of pair programming that I think that I learned a long time ago is to have a well-defined task before you begin. However, a lot of the work of programming is coming up with those tasks. So, there are a lot of these things that say, make sure you have such and such when you begin. It's like, what if I don't have that yet? So, what I'm wondering is if you're mobbing like all day, I don't know if do you mob like 8 hours a day?
Yeah,
Pretty
about
much, yeah.
7, yeah.
Yeah, like there's a hour or more for learning, but yeah, yes, at
Oh.
least 7 most days. Yeah.
So if you're mobbing all day, do you mob on defining tasks? And the reason I ask is because uh, defining tasks is a very unstructured problem with a lot of vagueness, right? It's not like with programming, you have like a test. Did the test pass? It's like really easy to see, it's really easy to get everyone coordinated and on board with the current task. When it's, well, I have some vague idea, how do we break this down into something concrete? How do you go about that in a mob?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so for us, we tend to by default mob all the things, so whatever is needed to provide value.
Yeah,
And
email and just anything really, right?
yes, yeah. Yeah, like so we started the day checking communications, chat messages, email, and pipeline failures, all that kind of stuff. And then often one of the first things we do is when we were in person, you would go to the whiteboard where we had Kanban cards, and we'd be like, okay, from those communications, we have more or less, less cards. And then we decide either from a failing test or the Kanban card, what's the last thing we're working on yesterday? And then we'll either pick up that work. And sometimes that Kanban card is very well defined. Like yesterday, we were in the middle of implementing what this button does to talk to some hardware. Sometimes it's super open-ended. Like we just finished some work, shipped it, and they like it, and now we're ready to do the next thing. And the next thing is figure out what to do next. Or uh, in this ballpark, do something in this very huge ballpark, which you just can't do, right? Like, go boil the ocean. We're like, okay. So, um, and so what that usually leads to is as a mob, we'll go talk to who we need to figure out to break down the work. And sometimes we know enough in the mob, and sometimes we need to add people to the mob dynamically, whether that's go meeting with customers or stakeholders. And so then we go through the whole process of kind of planning, agile planning, but as a mob. So let's say someone, asks for the world, A through Z, and then we'll find out, okay, which of these items are most important? Which of these items are simplest to do? And then we look for a bargain hunt, on which thing to like, okay, if we did item T first instead of A, it'll provide a lot of value and we can get feedback from the field quickly. Let's do it. And it's technically simpler than doing A first or whatever. And so you have to break down the work as a mob. Usually it involves diagramming or at least making cards and breaking it down. Um, and then we pick a card and do it, and then we reassess as we go. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I don't know if you have anything to add, Chris.
Yeah, well, I think generally, and maybe this is like more common to industry in general, is that we do try to have a playbook of understanding what to do next, and maybe that's really structured, and maybe it's not. But I think, at a very high level, the company decides what to do based on kind of ranking different opportunities of like what products to build. And then that product will get funding, and so then it's really when we start working on software, we say we have a couple of criteria. So like one, as early as possible, we want to get into like an alpha test scenario where we have actual customers using it. And so to us, then we start thinking about this concept of cost of delay, which is like, what's the thing that will make us the most money, or in absence of money, what will give us the most feedback or information about the product that we're building, and then we will get that out as quickly as possible. So then it's very clear that we have some bigger chunk to do. And then we say we use some level of story splitting. And there's kind of a method when people don't know story splitting, I kind of recommend looking at Spider, SPIDR. And so when you do spider story splitting, then that turns into a lot of really small tasks, and then you organize those tasks also based on cost of delay, or or like I said, the absence of money, learning delay to learning, um, and then that becomes really clear because now you have a bunch of little cards that just say do this next, do this next, do this next, do this next. And then one thing that I learned from Woody Zool early on in working with like unit testing in general was this idea that you always end your day with a failing test, so you don't have to take a long time to remember what you were doing and where to go next. And so if you end with passing tests, then you by default just look at the Kanban and try and figure out like what do we do next? And in the morning you're like getting coffee, you're just trying to figure out what you're doing. When the first thing you see in the morning is a failing test, and that test is already gives you context about what you need to do, it's like you're like right back into it. And so you can very quickly just remember what you're doing. And so often, if I want to keep flow going, the following day, it's like, no, wait, let's put in a failing test, something that we know we need to do next. And when we run the tests in the morning, it'll be like, oh yeah, that's what we were doing, and you're right back into it where you were when you left for the day.
All right. That gives me some clarity. Let's see. Here's one that came up recently. Sometimes a student, when they become the navigator, they're not, they just finished driving. They're kind of having they're not completely up in sync with it, and they're not sure what to do. And the way our mob works is kind of everyone talks, hey, you want to try this, right? It's that kind of activity. And the navigator can't really get a thought together because there's too much going on. There are too many people already jumping in with thoughts. Um, do you have does that ever happen to you? And do you have a solution to that?
Yeah. The first thought that comes to me is yeah, it kind of describes kind of more the rowdy mob scenario, which is in itself a good thing because you have a lot of excited people. Um, and I think I guess it takes more context and history to know the first experiment to run, at least for me, in that if it's just a rowdy mob in general and usually tends to equalize. So this person doesn't know what to do. Maybe excited people overstep them, but later in the session, that person speaks up and it kind of equalizes, as Chris was talking about before. Or if this is a situation where there's a pattern of one person not being given a chance to navigate because the loud talkers just keep taking over.
Oh,
Right. And so if it's the former, there's not much to do. The rowdy mob will eventually figure it out, in my opinion. If it's the latter, where there's just kind of this imbalance, that's constantly happening that in some senses is rude, maybe not consciously or intentionally rude. It's just to step in as a facilitator and just be like, hey, I think and you can set up some kind of rule from the mob. So it could be strict navigation, which is, hey, I grad, everybody's excited, but talk to the navigator, help them, let them finish their thought, and then weigh in. You can do strict navigation. Or if you want to leave the mob roles a little more open-ended, you can just go to strict Kanban with the experiment ideas. But just make sure you call on each person. Like, okay, sounds like we have a lot of ideas. Let's get each idea down and then try them one at a time. And this might go back to what Chris was saying with go with the junior ideas first or the least privileged person. So if the person that gets talked over the most, so you go to each person, you write a Kanban card or like a bullet note on the whiteboard of each idea to try. And then me as the facilitator, if someone's been stepped on a lot, I'll be like, all right, let's go with this person's idea to try first,
oh, okay.
just to kind of equalize it. And you can just kind of do it, or you could be more explicit about it, about why you're picking that one first. But I think if it's rowdy in a bad sense, it's just time as a facilitator to step in and either use Kanban and kind of try each idea as a way to equalize or just strict navigation. Yeah, what are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I would just throw in there, some element of randomness. So you could dice or there's like a wheel. You just pick the person's idea. But yeah, I do think like, when there's a lot of ideas, that's a good thing. And so I also like the everyone draws for basically putting the idea into a drawing of some kind. If it's something like an architecture that you're discussing, that can often remove, when people are talking past each other, it's a lot easier um, to align on a drawing than it is to align on verbal descriptions. And so sometimes everybody in the group is saying the exact same thing, but they don't realize it. And I've certainly seen that before. And as soon as you get it into a drawing, or as soon as you pick somebody to start navigating the solution entirely, you find that everybody was saying the same thing all along, and they were all just talking past each other. So that can certainly be a situation.
Okay, that definitely gives me some ideas. Yeah, we're definitely a rowdy mob.
Okay.
Um, and we came up with a solution. We haven't tried this yet, but it's when the navigator feels overwhelmed and just needs a moment to, just let it process. The navigator can say, "May I have a moment of silence, please?"
Yeah, I like it.
Love it.
I'm looking forward to when we can try that. Um, let's
Nice.
see. My next question is, um, what do you do with some programmers who are, let's just say, intransigent? They have an idea
Ooh.
about the right way to do it, and anything else is, wrong because of this or that. And who very often when I've met these people, they're very often highly talented, right? They
Right.
may well be right. Um, Fortunately, I have not seen this in my own class. Um, and I'm thinking one possible solution is, well, some people are just not cut out for mobbing, right? That's okay. Don't find another way for them to contribute. However, I have a special reason for asking though, and that is if I do another mobbing class, um, disinviting a student is not an option. There's going to have to be a way to keep the mob good, even if one person is kind of rowing against the team. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I think as I've grown experience, I think I appear or am this person often, sometimes in mobs, and I think it's natural from what I've seen. When you're younger in your career, you're um, you you haven't experienced, at least for me, a lot of bad things, and so you're kind of more open to, oh, sure, let's try that. Maybe it'll launch us off a cliff, but okay, or maybe it'll be good, maybe bad. Where the more experienced I get, when I look at code, there is like maybe a lot of ways that work well, but there's infinitely more ways that go very poorly. And
Yeah.
so, um, yeah, I think often I am this person. And so if I'm trying to give advice for someone handling me, uh, and what I try to advise myself is, um, even if my idea is correct, like I know the experiment's going to fail, you still want it to play out. So you want to set up the experiment to run with short feedback and as quickly as possible so that the code says it or the experiment or the test says it, and I don't have to say it as much. Maybe I'm there to explain afterwards, but um, and so basically, it's going back to what Chris was talking about before, where you do both. You try all the experiments, and then you can weigh out which one's better. And not all the time, but a large majority of the time, the experiments themselves speak for themselves. And so, right, and so you're like, great, your idea is different than mine. Let's try yours, and then let's try mine, and then let's talk about the pros and cons of them. And there is the 5% of case where, uh, because I have a different North Star than the other people, I care about, you know, uh, some certain design principles more than they do, they don't care. They're like, I like my experiment better than yours, right? Um,
Oh, mhm.
and that's a different kind of problem. But I would say the first move is just to at least try both first, and then being, part of not just knowing the answers or having a good guess at the answers, but being able to walk a group through and experimenting and being able to learn to see why certain paths are better than others is like a coaching skill. It's like the next level.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, hmm.
And I'll just say, like, you know, there is a spectrum of that, and on the most extreme sides, that often becomes a, like, how do you teach this person to be accepting of ideas that are not their own, right? So, like, teaching, uh, you know, tolerance for wasted time, quote unquote, like in their eyes. Like
Oh, yeah.
sometimes that becomes the challenge. And so or if you have other ways to kind of hold up the mirror and be like, okay, well, is, is your viewpoint that you're holding strongly, actually harmful to the progress of the entire team when you're like so invested in something? And so that's certainly like a personal feedback thing where if you're saying, hey, let's try both solutions, and they're saying, no, I won't because it's a waste of time and my idea is right, then it becomes like more Socratic questioning. So you believe you can learn absolutely nothing by seeing the other solution being put in place, and do you fully understand where the other person's coming from? That that becomes a much more challenging problem. And I've seen it before, kind of in the office environment. And sometimes it's saying like, I think my biggest when I've seen it work well for that mirror to show up is if somebody is going to different teams all of the time, and in every team they find somebody else to blame than themselves, then it's then easier to have the conversation of like, hey, the last three teams you've been on, you've found somebody to pin blame on. And so is this a pattern, or does this just exist on every single team? And then it's like you can have a deeper conversation about where their personality is coming from.
Yeah.
um and so helping people get to the point where they're, I think in the short term, you need, they may disagree, but you can say, I know we disagree on this, but can you commit to, for this class, seeing every option be put into place? So that's the disagree and commit kind of mentality. Um, when it's in the business environment, it's not temporary like a class is. And so, and a lot of the time it is, people that you've hired, and it's not like you want to let them go just because they can't tolerate, you want coach to be able to coach and move people forward in their thinking. So, uh, yeah, so it's certainly a different problem. But for in the class scenario where it's a fixed time and they won't have to deal with it longer than a certain point, at some point I would just ask, like, even though you disagree, can you commit?
yeah.
Okay. It's sounding like, if I'm trying to be ready for things going badly in a future class, and it
Right,
sounded like so a tool I need to have ready to go is to meet with that student out of class, or out of the mob, and and see if we can find some way for them to be satisfied with what's going on and still yield, try out other ideas.
right,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's something you can model as well because the students, in your case, your professor, or in our context, someone who has experience or expertise, um, the mom may view them as this kind of person, right? And so you're kind of already standing in the shoes of this kind of person who knows many ways that work. And so to model this behavior yourself, so to be like, that's not what I was originally thinking, like you speaking to a student, but let's try RD and see how it goes. And then the times, because since I've been this kind of person before too, really celebrate the case where you're wrong.
Oh
Make a
yeah.
big deal out of it, like, wow, I really got that wrong. Or celebrate the case where I really think A and someone else really thinks B, and then you try out both, and then you realize, oh, we can do kind of this A B thing that gets the best of both worlds and has less of the cons of both things. Like celebrate those moments can
Oh,
help model it for other people who feel like they know or they actually do know, right? And to show that you don't always know. Software development, at least in the industry and in my experience in the classroom too, is most of the time you're wrong. And
yeah.
the skill you need to get good at is adapting when you're wrong and learning how to be wrong and then turn that into something valuable and learn from it.
Right.
And then also teach them. And I think this is where sometimes it's a parting of ways, like different North Stars. So I've seen in our context people who are very smart and very good at delivering, but are less interested in helping others learn that skill. There is kind of like there's like learning, contributing, and then coaching, and then they're less interested in the coaching part. The
Yes.
system needs coaches to help bring up other people, right? Because if you don't, then you're kind of you can fall into the answer pattern of the genius with 1,000, followers who just do whatever he says, right? And so
Oh,
that's very bad for a company long term. Um, and so most often people are open to learn how to be a coach, but there's been a few cases where they're just like, I just want to contribute and I don't want to help other people learn. And then maybe they're not a good, fit, for company culture. For a classroom, you might have to pull the card that I've seen some trainers do, which is for the life of this classroom, you're going to operate this way to get the grade.
oh,
Right?
okay.
This is part of the learning experience. When you go outside my classroom, maybe you can find a company that doesn't want you to help other people learn, and that's
Hmm.
fine. But for my classroom, you're going to help other people learn. And so,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Sometimes you got to lay down the law, you know, if you're in that position.
Hopefully you don't have to experience that, but yeah, if
Yeah.
it's if you reach an impasse because classes are temporary, I think it is different than saying like I'm going to spend the next 5 years working with this person, and I'm going to have to that and so that's a different challenge. So
Um, yeah, so, yeah, I like knowing I feel better knowing I have a plan to deal with this if
right,
it comes up. Because you know what, even this class, I said, well, I've only have 7 students. What if I've got one bad apple, right?
yeah,
So fortunately, it was just I think I got extremely lucky with this class. Everyone is amazingly cooperative and helpful. But
Nice.
it's not always going to be that way. Uh,
Nice.
let's see. Oh, and by the way, it's interesting about in software development, you have to learn that you're wrong. I would say nearly always wrong. That's how you put it. Um, yeah, I think some students I've seen it like shakes their confidence that they're wrong, and I guess yeah,
well,
that just seeing it happen over and over and over again, you make a
yeah,
you're constantly correcting. Your first idea is never right.
right.
Maybe
Well, I'll expand on that. So you know, you're mostly wrong all the time because software development's about automation, and you automate the stuff that you know often. And so it's like, hey, I figured out how to use this API, and now I'm just going to call it, and I understand it. And so next time you do it, you might even automate like the implementation with like a template or some sort of abstraction. And so I think if you're doing software development well, you're automating the stuff you know. So you should, you could argue that you should be wrong all the time because you shouldn't be doing the things that you know how to do well often,
yeah.
right? Because then that means that you would be automating it away. And if you do find yourself, that's where you see people that have relived 20 years of experience doing the same work over and over again. Because whenever they get and I also talk about this with like software estimation. So when people are asked to estimate software, they would say it's an anti-pattern to be correct in your software estimates because that means that if you
Huh.
could estimate software well, then you probably should have been able to automate the creation of that software or abstract the creation of that software, because you should not be able to know what you're doing next because that thing would likely have been automated anyway, or should have been automated and wasn't. And so the people that are really good at estimating the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, that to me leads me to believe that they are manually writing out code that they know how to write and they know how long it's going to take, when they could be abstracting away or generating those things. So,
Interestingly, it doesn't make me feel that much better about having a hard time estimating, though. You know, people who are paying for it want they want to know when it's going to happen.
mhm. Yeah.
But let me see here. I'll go into another question. So we're using the Qt library. It's a GUI library for C++. It's it's been around for like, I don't know, 25, 30 years. Very sophisticated, a lot to know. So we're all learning it, and we often have to search the documentation. And I wonder if you can tell me anything about mob documentation reading.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Go
Well,
ahead,
I don't
Chris.
go. Yeah. I mean, so for me, yeah, there are a lot of ways that you can approach this, and to an extent, using large language models is a new way to do it. But I would say traditionally, just like mobbing will help you learn new shortcuts, I think mobbing will also help you traverse documentation faster. And so often, I think in the past, before large language models, I would often navigate, go to Stack Overflow. If the title looks good, skip the question, go to the green check mark because that was the first solution. Seen, check, whether or not that works, and then go back. Now with large language models, a lot of the times you can just copy the entirety of the documentation into the prompt and then say, "Tell me how to do this," and then it will go through the documentation for you and pull out the solution. And so, I think that helps speed up everything. Um, and and generally, when I'm playing with external APIs like that, I will be mobbing with the team, but I'll also have my own personal laptop with the ability to, iterate on that quickly. And so maybe somebody's navigating a an attempt to make something work. I will also be trying many little things, and then I'll be like, yeah, I found it. I can navigate it now. So those are some of my go-tos. And then I also use speed readers as well. So sometimes I'll be like, I'll be right back, and then I'll listen to the content of the documentation at 500 words a minute, and then I'd come back and say, I found where it is. Here it is. So those are some of my go-tos. I don't know, Austin, if you have other.
Yeah, yeah, and I think to try to, meld it to your context. So in our context, we tend to mob everything because it's valuable for us all to be learning better ways to do all the things to provide value. When you're in a classroom context, it might be different in that you have a specific objective, right? Like you said, your course was about design. So, for example, and I was watching a recording of a live stream, and which kind of feels like mobbing, but you're not really mobbing with them because everyone's just kind of in the chat and not really like you're not watching a pair mob. But it's interesting. I see them often when they don't know what to do, they'll turn off the live stream and then be like, I'm gonna go look at documentation and I'll be back or whatever, right? And then they'll clip it together later or whatever. Um, it's too boring for you to watch me read documentation. So for us in our context, while it might be boring, we need to learn how to do it to get the job done. And so that's part of the learning experience and part of what we want to teach to others, right? Um, because, example from 6 years ago was we're working with infrastructure as code, which at that time I didn't know much about. I would do a generic Google search where someone who is more experienced went to a specific website of the vendor and searched a very particular way to get the documentation. Where now these days, it's like what Chris says. You get all the information dumped into an AI, and then that'll get you there pretty quick as well. There's still Google. We still Google quite a few things. However, I can see for the purpose of your classroom, if you make learn your target learning everything,
Oh,
it might be too much, right? Unless your course is an open-ended, like project-based thing, right? And so, um, So I can see a time and a place to say, um, I'm gonna break down, like going back to what you answered before. I'm gonna break down the work for you because this class isn't about story splitting. And or
Oh.
I'm gonna have all the answers on the documentation because this course isn't about reading documentation and applying it. It's about design principles. However, you could keep them learning all the things necessary with your North Star still being design. Um, but I could also see you taking it out depending on what you're doing. Like I've done that for katas before where we only have an hour and the thing people came to learn was, let's say, how to refactor to the strategy pattern. Um, I'm gonna prepare everything so much so there's nothing to do with that code other than refactor it to the strategy pattern. So there will be no unanswered questions. Like there's not like, oh, we're gonna spend the first 45 minutes breaking down the work and then we'll start refactoring the strategy. Well, then you run out of time, right? And so um, sometimes you need to do a lot of the work to keep the learning focused. If it's kind of more of like a learning thing than a doing thing. But there's a brain dump for you.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, go
I'll,
ahead, Chris.
I'll just say that the number of things that you're learning simultaneously, I think, detract from the learning of any one thing, right? So there is, like Austin's saying, I think there is a focus element to this. And so sometimes uh, you want to pay attention to the number of learnings that are in flight simultaneously. And again, if it's all on the fluent edge for everyone, then it can be fun, right?
Mhm.
And very engaging. But if if you do have people falling into overwhelm, then it can really detract from, you don't, if you're overwhelmed with one thing you're learning, you don't learn anything well, I think. So that might be a big piece of it is you should be like just outside of everybody's abilities. And if you're learning to do all of these things at the same time, it can really detract from the flow, right?
Oh yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, what we've been doing is I just sort of assign as a reading, read this part of the QT documentation,
Nice.
figure out QT's rules for ownership because you have to, free memory, it's C++.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's an insight I've forgotten about, which is um, you need if you can focus on learning one thing at a time, it's a lot better than getting overwhelmed. And I think some of my students are getting hit with too many things at once. So
Right.
I'm going to bear this in mind the rest of the semester.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, and I think it's fine to experience the edges. So Chris is talking about the fluent edge, which has like bored, frustrated on the extremes, and then the middle is like you're stretched, but you're enjoying it, right? Um, and you're going to be bound, like any mob is hitting those walls all the time. I think it's kind of like getting good at failing. We were talking about the previous question. I
Yeah.
think with a mob or a group, getting good at failing with the fluent edge and just responding to it appropriately, right? So if they're bored, increase the difficulty or the amount of things learned. If they're frustrated, reduce. So you can inspect and adapt on the fly. Um, so it's okay to fail, but it just adapt quickly. Or if you know a lot in advance, you can restrict it going into it. But sometimes you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you think, there's been some katas I prepared, and they're like, "We know all this." Like, okay, I'm like, okay, great. Well, let's do the decorator pattern. Like you have to adjust quickly. Like I restricted it too much, and they were bored, right? And so, and yeah, so yeah. Any thoughts on that, or that might have to be the last question on time, though.
Okay. Yeah.
All
Um,
right. Yeah. So
yeah, that gives me a lot to think about. And anyway, lots of good ideas here and lots of insight here for make this thing continue to work.
awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for being on the show again, Ben, and to our audience, if you know anybody that is kind of just learning about mobbing, or maybe they're in a class mobbing, and some of the content here will be useful to them, please share this video, and be sure to like and subscribe. Ben, thanks again for being on the show, and we will see everybody next time. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks for letting
Thanks.
me ask all the questions this time too.
All right.
Nice. See ya.